Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. When Jeanette Nuñez resigned her position as lieutenant governor to become the interim president of Florida National University, and no one was really shocked. It was no secret this was a position she coveted. And since Governor Ron DeSantis has less than 2 years to go in his term, it makes sense for Nuñez to secure her own future. And let's not forget, as lieutenant governor, she was making $135,000 a year. As FIU president, she'll be making more than $1 million a year. This week, I sat down with Nuñez to talk about whether she is qualified to be a university president, her goals for the school, and why the state is going through the pretense of a national search when everyone knows it's a done deal she'll remain. But we started with this discussion about the state's decision to no longer allow undocumented students to qualify for in-state tuition at FIU and other Florida schools. And let's not forget, the in-state tuition program for undocumented students was actually her idea 10 years ago. This was one of your crowning achievements when you were in the legislature in 2014 to allow those undocumented kids who were here to have in-state tuition. That was now been rescinded effective in July. And you support the revision of it. Why?
Yeah, well, Jim, what I'll say is that obviously 2014, the situation in our country was much different. And yes, indeed, I did champion it at the time. It was specific to a group of students, our DACA students. It was narrow in scope. Obviously, over the years, we've seen what has happened with illegal immigration, and especially these last several years. And what we saw was a tremendous amount of strain on not only our public schools, our social services, but just a complete and total different direction as we went from a public policy debate, I think was really what started to get us thinking as it related to the obligation we have to our U.S. citizens, our Florida residents that are here, that, as you know, it's very competitive. And we have an obligation to make sure that we have ample capacity for those students. And what is the responsibility of the taxpayer in terms of footing the bill for that in-state tuition reimbursement? Well,
you talked about that in 2014 when you talked, and this is what you said, there are children through no fault of their own who live in our state, are educated in our public schools, and yet after investing tens of thousands of dollars to educate them, we shut the door on their future. It makes absolutely no sense. It seems like we have made an investment in these kids. The logic that you used at the time, why doesn't it still hold true today?
Well, I think when you look at what has happened and you've seen the influx of illegal immigration and how that has really taxed the state of Florida, because while we are not a border state, clearly we've seen a tremendous uptick, and you can speak to obviously the superintendent and what he's seen in terms of the growth and the enrollment, not only in our public schools but across the board. And so we as a state, in a different perspective, whereas before I was representing a district and as lieutenant governor had to have that perspective statewide, and really the investments that we've made and the requirements that we have to fulfill our obligations to the taxpayer. I really think that started to reformulate and frame the discussion. And I think when you see what has transpired over the last several years, it really was an important policy discussion and debate to have. And many that were in the legislature then have also shifted their positions and have looked at it from a different lens. And when you see the number of students, that whereas FIU probably is the largest institution in terms of those tuition waivers, it is a number that is a significant amount of funding that goes to those out-of-state reimbursement waivers.
Do you know how many people at FIU do you estimate is affected by it?
Roughly, the number is somewhere in 538, but we as an institution don't have the ability to pinpoint specifically how many of those 538 are indeed under that tuition reimbursement waiver. We assume that it's a good number of them.
You also said, you quoted Ezekiel, the child will not share the guilt of the parent. Don't hold these children responsible for something they had no control over. Again, I understand how the politics have changed, but the humanity of what these kids are facing that you talked about, you know, these are people who work hard, study hard, and face challenges and obstacles that many of us in this room will never comprehend. That's what you said in 2014. Is that still not true today?
Well, Jim, what I think you want to talk about is obviously the pulling of the heartstrings versus the real responsibility that we have as a state. And again, not harping on what has occurred the last 4 years, obviously the country went in a much different direction. And so I think what you see is a responsibility to look at programs such as that one and see where the value is. What about the students that are U.S. citizens that cannot afford to come to our universities? What responsibility do we bear for them? And so you constantly have to make those decisions, and the legislature went in that direction.
I'm curious if those students who are affected by it, if you would be willing to make a commitment to help fundraise privately for those students so that they could complete their education.
Well, Jim, I couldn't commit to fundraising for a particular student or group of students because I believe that the university president has a responsibility, right, to ensure that the system is providing educational opportunities for all our students. So it's not like I can sit here and tell you, yes, I will fundraise for that group of students.
Why did you want to be university president here at FIU?
Well, certainly I think you know it's my alma mater, but beyond just being my alma mater, it's an opportunity to lead an organization that I truly believe in. I've seen the great work that FIU has done over the years. I've been connected to it directly and indirectly, both as a student, as a parent that's invested in FIU, because I've seen the excellence that comes out of here. And then obviously throughout my time in the legislature, throughout my time as lieutenant governor, working very closely with the institution. And so I see ample opportunity to continue to grow and elevate FIU, both from the perspective of the rankings, but also in terms of the educational outcomes that we deliver each and every day. And I feel like the time is right to make sure that we are recognized not only amongst our peers, but that the outcomes start to match up and align with the perception and the reality of what's going on here. And so I'm eager to lead this institution to the next level. And I firmly believe that FIU is on an upward trajectory that really has no limits are really in our reach. We have to continue to push forward.
Often university presidents have backgrounds, they've been provosts or deans or professors. You know, they have some history with educational institutions. I mean, other than, I think, a little bit of an adjunct professorship, you really don't have that type of credential. So what qualifies you to be university president?
Well, while I have not spent my time in academia, I would say that's probably one of the reasons that I'm most qualified, because I can come in from the outside and I can reform and I can disrupt in a healthy and in positive way, and look forward to taking FIU in ways and in directions that it was on the path. But I think with the relationships, with the ability that I've shown to lead in a number of areas, and as my role as lieutenant governor, and being able to tap in and to leverage into those resources, relationships, I really do believe if you look at people that have led institutions, whether we're talking about other universities, the likes of Betty Castor, T.K. Weatherall, John Thrasher, Frank Brogan, and you look at people perhaps just down the street, someone like a Carlos Migoya, that completely changed the direction that Jackson was going. He didn't have an experience in healthcare. He was a banker, and he's done such great things for that hospital system.
You know, it wasn't that long ago that when it looked like Pete Hegseth was going to be in trouble for being confirmed as defense secretary in the Trump administration, and there was a lot of people that believed, there was an expectation that Ron DeSantis would be next to be tapped for that position, which would have elevated you to the position of governor. I'm curious, did you start thinking about what it would be like to be governor, and was that ever a goal for you to potentially be the governor of the state of Florida? When you're lieutenant governor, you would think naturally you have those thoughts. When did you give up on the idea of being governor?
Well, I think when you're lieutenant governor, to your point, there's always that possibility. And yes, it was a very real possibility. And as you heard all the rumors circulating, a lot of it was palace intrigue and conjecture. But yes, the thought of elevating to the governor's role was certainly at the forefront. And I was kind of working through some of those next steps, politically speaking, trying to see if it was going to be the right time. And if that would have happened, clearly it would have been a different trajectory for me, a different direction. But looking through the political realities and the dynamics that we've seen over the last couple of months, I think certainly that shifted in my mind.
Did you ever have a discussion with the governor about replacing Marco Rubio?
Actually we did. We spoke about it. It was something that at the time, and I continue to think I made the right decision, wasn't interested in being appointed to the United States Senate. So he and I did discuss it.
If you had wanted to be appointed, did he offer it to you?
Well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think certainly I would have been one of the candidates he would have interviewed. And I believe that I've earned his trust over the years, and I think he knows that I'm more than competent, more than capable to lead, whether it's at the United States Senate or here at FIU.
I had someone on your team essentially tell me that if you wanted to be the U.S. Senator, that position was yours.
Well, I guess we'll never know, right? So,
you're right now the interim president. Mm-hmm. There is going to be, last I heard, a national search for a permanent president. Excuse me, but it seems like that just is farcical. Like does anybody truly think? If they didn't do a search,
you would say the same thing.
Well, but does anybody truly think that you're not going to be named the president of FIU? Who in their right mind would apply for the job knowing that the Board of Trustees appointed by DeSantis, the Board of Governors appointed by DeSantis, will ultimately decide, will ultimately approve? I guess I'm just wondering, it's probably a $250,000 expense to run a national search in a legitimate sort of way. Why should anybody believe that it's a legitimate search?
Well, we have requirements that are laid out by the Board of Governors. I welcome competition, and to your point, who would apply? I'm sure there's plenty of people that will apply, and I think the job that I do as interim will obviously lay the foundation of how the Board of Trustees and the search committee views me in terms of a viable candidate to be the permanent president. But it is my intention to become permanent president, and I expect to do a phenomenal job in the interim, and obviously dissuade any naysayers. But really, at the end of the day, if we weren't doing a search, you'd be sitting here saying it's a farce and it's a sham. So you can't win no matter what you do. So we're going to comply with state law. We're going to go forward and have it be as open and transparent as possible.
Do you have any qualms with the way that you were appointed, though? I know that you've praised former President Jessel. Mm-hmm. Former President Jessel has said nice things about you as well. But why the need to have this happen when it was? President Jessel's contract wasn't up until November. You could have undertaken a search. You could have applied. There could have been a process. And then at the end of the year, I guess I'm trying to understand why the rush to get you in as quickly as it was.
Well, I know many in the media categorize it as a hostile takeover, but I can assure you it's more like a merger and an acquisition rather than a hostile takeover. And when you talk about the rush, certainly the succession planning would have occurred around this time anyways. So when the chair reached out, expressed if I was interested, I certainly had that conversation with him. Timing really was, I think, part of the reason that we went forward in this direction. I think given that we're heading into, as you know very well, Jim, a very pivotal time in the legislative session, I just thought it was a good opportunity to start, and I'm excited, like I said, to be able to work with former President Jessel and make sure that we continue to elevate FIU in a positive direction.
What's your biggest goals right now?
Wanting to make sure that we capitalize on the upcoming legislative session. I think that would be a really good starting point for me. But then really, as I mentioned, my focus is solely going to be on the success of our students, making sure that we continue to rise in the rankings, making sure that we're positioning ourselves not just as the top choice in terms of educational offerings throughout the state of Florida, but also making sure that we're meeting our mission in terms of providing that economic return on investment. We're a huge driver for the state's economy. As you know, we're a huge driver for the local economy, but it goes beyond that. And I think when we're looking at what are the experiences that our students need, especially as we see all the disruption in technology coming forth, I think that we're, again, uniquely positioned to take advantage of all of those disruptions, take advantage of all the ensuing and emerging technologies, and really make sure our students have the best possible outcomes when they leave here.
When we come back, as a result of our documentary on the death of Tristan Murphy in a Florida prison, the president of the Florida Senate is now pushing a bill to reform how mentally ill people are treated in the criminal justice system. It is a major development. Please stay with us. We'll have more after the break. Welcome back. In our documentary Warehouse, The Life and Death of Tristan Murphy, we revealed how the state has failed to properly treat people with mental illnesses who end up in the criminal justice system. Tristan was sent to a prison on a littering charge. That's right, a littering charge. And after failing to treat his well-documented schizophrenia, prison officials placed him on a work detail and handed him a chainsaw. He revved it up and tried to cut off his own head. His mother, Cindy, has been fighting to make changes so that what happened to Tristan doesn't ever happen again. This week, State Senator Jennifer Bradley introduced Senate Bill 168, the Tristan Murphy Act, which will offer treatment rather than prison for people like Tristan. And Senate President Ben Albritton has made passing this bill one of his top priorities. After the bill was introduced, I spoke to Senator Bradley and asked her what she was hoping to accomplish with this piece of legislation.
I'm hoping it brings some comfort to families who have loved ones with mental illness, who worry every day that their loved one is going to have an interaction with the criminal justice system that brings them into the deep end of the system. What this bill does is it provides some off-ramps, it provides treatment, it provides better training and funding in communities through the state, similar to what Judge Leifman has done in Miami that's proven to be very successful. And the hope is that we provide some options and alternatives in the system to avoid the tragedy that Tristan Murphy experienced from happening to other families.
You mentioned earlier the sheriffs, and I think that's an important point to bring up. I was very hard on Sheriff Prumel in the documentary I did, but I think my understanding is he took it to heart himself and really sort of went after examining what happened and how things can improve. And in reality, we put sheriffs in a terrible situation because we end up asking them to house people in jails who shouldn't be really housed in jails. They're not equipped to really provide the mental health counseling that's needed. So from a law enforcement standpoint, you know, this is a bill that they want. At least the impression I get is that they want to try to tackle this issue, the sheriffs across the state.
Law enforcement is absolutely in support of this bill, and I think you stated it perfectly. Law enforcement is not equipped to deal with severe mental illness, and neither is our correction system. Our state corrections, our prison system is the third largest in the country. They're the largest provider of mental health in the state, and they are not equipped to do that. And so I think offering tools to law enforcement and making sure there's resources in the community is something that law enforcement would welcome.
I think the best way to describe what the goal here is that if there is someone with a mental health issue, before they get too far down the line in the criminal justice system, that we find a diversion. I remember interviewing the judge who ended up sentencing Tristan Murphy to prison for the charge that he ended up killing himself. And that judge had said, and it always stuck with me, he wished he had more tools available to him to be able to tackle issues like this. Will this give him more tools?
Absolutely. It'll create a model diversion plan for both misdemeanors and felonies so that when someone is booked into the jail, they are evaluated. If they need involuntary commitment, there's a path for that. But it also allows them to recover their competency on an outpatient basis using community resources. And that will do two things. One, it will allow them to get those services they need immediately. And it will also hold those forensic beds that there is a long wait list for the ones who need it the absolute most. So it will provide off-ramps as well as hopefully streamline the system so that everyone gets their services faster.
I think that was one of the interesting things that came out from your hearing that you held in the last session was there is currently a law on the books in the state of Florida that says once a person is found incompetent to proceed, they must be transferred to a treatment facility within 15 days. However, what we learned is, and it wasn't just in Tristan Murphy's case where it went on for hundreds of days, But many people are facing that same situation because the Department of Children and Families, which oversees the placement on those beds, doesn't have enough resources. So your hope is to shift them into more community rather than those more extreme hospital beds that DCF runs.
There's a shortage of forensic beds. And so when people come in and it's determined that they can recover their competency on an outpatient basis by connecting them and giving them a plan that they must follow in the community, that will allow two populations to be served and hopefully keep those beds for the ones that need it the most.
I think another aspect from what I read in the bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that so often we found that when people go through a diversion program or a judge sentences someone, that there is no follow-up afterwards, that the person then isn't required really to maintain their meds or see outside treatment on an ongoing basis. Does this address some of that now going forward?
Yeah, it incorporates the mental health treatment plans into the terms of their probation, links them up with community services, and make sure that there's follow through after they are diverted to make sure that they continue to receive the services they need and don't just cycle back through the system again.
I realize the funding isn't part of this bill, but do you see that as being something that the legislature will tackle as well, so the funding is there to treat people that need treatment?
Sure, and I think that there is grant money there provided for extra training so that they're able to be screened for 911 and EMT so that they know what services to connect someone with quicker and in the right way. It takes rural counties and fiscally constrained counties that often have a matching component to the funds that they're given, and oftentimes they don't have those funds. So this provides that fiscally constrained counties do not have to provide a match. And so, of course, we have standards we have to have strong standards in making sure people are getting high quality care. But access continues to be an issue in having enough providers in the communities throughout the state. Some parts of the state have the providers. Other parts of the state, we really need to incentivize and build those support systems. You
mentioned Cindy Murphy. Talk to me a little bit about what you think, how she's comported herself during this time, and the fact that she's made the trips to Tallahassee and has spoken out to try to do this. Give me your sense of the role that Cindy Murphy has played in helping move this along.
Yeah, and I talked to Cindy today and told her again how incredibly impressed I was with the bravery of her family after having endured the grief and the tragedy that they did, for stepping up, engaging with you the way they did on the documentary, sharing their pain, sharing their story, because it really highlights in a very human way the way our system is not built to deal with those who have mental illness. And she is just an incredible inspiration, I'm sure, for many families across the state, and for me, for being so willing and open to share their pain and grief, to try to make the other families make sure that they don't have to ever go down the road that she did.
The first hearing for the bill is next week. We'll keep you posted on what happens. We'll be right back. Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I do so enjoy hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.